Hello and welcome to this edition of Bayou Time. I'm your host, Keith Whiteside, licensed clinical social worker with Trouble Home Care. Very glad you're joining us. However you may be joining us, we appreciate it. We're always glad to get with us those people who are helping make the big decisions. We welcome back to the program Majority Leader Steve Scalise. Steve, thanks for joining us today.
Well, Keith, great to be here with you in Houma.
I appreciate that. And listen, when you guys come down, you guys really make a difference. Tell us a little bit about what y'all were able to go and do as y'all were evaluating what's happening offshore, this offshore energy. But y'all don't just look at it. You guys go out and get a feel for it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Keith, this is something I've been passionate about since I came to Congress. Getting good, smart energy policy at the federal level is critically important. And we've seen times where things were going well and it works well for the energy industry here. Lately, we've seen a pretty anti-American energy attitude from the administration, and it hurts families down here because people work in the industry. It's critical to America. You want low prices for gas, for household electricity. You want to make sure the policy's right, but it's really important to our economy. So every year, really starting my second year in Congress, I started bringing members of Congress down to a rig out in the Gulf. So we pick a different rig each year, and industry's been great working with us, letting us go to some of the different rigs. Last year, we went to a big Shell rig, Appomattox. This year, Hess allowed us to go on their Stampede platform.
Okay.
It's a platform that produces about 30,000 barrels of oil a day. And so I brought 8 members of Congress down. We had everybody from John James, who represents Michigan, to Debbie Lesko, who represents Arizona, and members of Congress from a lot of different places. But they care about policy. Very few people get to see what it's like on a rig. And when they go, it changes the way they talk about energy back in D.C. And so, we were just able to pass a major bill, the Lower Energy Costs Act, which was my bill, that focuses on good, smart energy policy. But it also dealt with things like revenue sharing. And I talk about that when we go out. We're flying on a helicopter. You go out over 60 miles south of Port Fourchon to go to the Stampede platform, for example. Well, you're flying over what used to be land that is now water because of coastal erosion. And so I talk about how we use the revenue sharing that we get from energy production to restore our coast, to rebuild land, to build that buffer so that when a hurricane comes, you don't have it hit land as strong and do as much damage. And we were able to get, of course, in the legislation I passed a few weeks ago, complete parity in revenue sharing, which for Louisiana means millions and billions of dollars more over time to restore our coast. So it was really good to do that yesterday. We then go into into the port and do a tour and talk about, with industry leaders, talk about the challenges they're facing. And of course, we had Archie Chasson and Gordy Dove, the parish's presidents of Terrebonne and Lafourche, were there with a lot of the port commissioners and people from industry. And so it gives these members of Congress a true perspective of what's involved in producing energy, how we've got a lot of American technology, but a lot of technology right here in South Louisiana. It's not just the jobs. It's the technology that goes along with it that's being used all over the world, but it starts right here. We're proud of it. We like showing it off, but it helps lead to better policies in Washington.
Yeah, and a lot of those things that we're being able to see now, where we see down at the port, where we can see on some of these rigs, the evaluation of how we're going to find a way to get energy more cost efficient and this wind energy as an option. So y'all were probably introduced to some of those things as well. What were the responses to some of the people that you brought down?
Yeah, members are literally blown away when they see it. You walk a rig, you're like 14 stories high, you're looking down and it's blue Caribbean water. It surely goes against the media narrative out of Washington where they want to make this industry seem dirty and they want to try to crush the American energy industry, and they've made it very difficult to produce in America. But we show off what really happens on a rig, the kind of jobs that are involved. Young people that are making really good money, that have great careers, but how they're producing energy. This rig, you go about 6,000 feet below the surface before they even start drilling the well, and these wells went over 16,000 feet into the earth where you find these massive reservoirs of fossil fuels, oil, natural gas, water. You bring it all up and you separate everything on that rig. I mean, it's literally like a mini refinery floating in the Gulf of Mexico. All American-made technology. You're talking about billions of dollars of private investment. but where you can take all of those resources that come up out of the ground, you separate the natural gas, and we have pipelines all that go all throughout the Gulf that can get it out to markets. Then you separate the gas, and you put the gas in a separate set of pipelines. You clean the water, and this is what happens every single day on these rigs all throughout the Gulf of Mexico. We want to do more of it. We want to produce more energy because right now, under the Biden administration, when they made it harder to get lease sales, to have permits to develop a well, all the things that are involved in building out more pipelines, because they've made it harder here, it's made us more dependent on foreign countries. Why should we have to go to Russia or Saudi Arabia or Venezuela for our energy? Nobody makes it cleaner, more efficient in the world than the United States. And then, of course, it means great jobs. It lowers the cost when you make it here at home. So all of those things are really important to talk about. It's a whole different world when you can bring members to actually see it. And then they become advocates when they go back to Washington or to their states back home.
Yeah, and again, it means so very much to us. It's our way of living. We're so dependent upon the Gulf, and in our area down here, it's one of those things where that's just where people's livelihoods are. We're so dependent upon that, but it's also good to be able to see that those others are being able to realize, okay, this is important. This is why it's important. And I love the fact that you can articulate that so very well. I mean, my brother worked offshore, and I don't think he could describe that as well as you are able to do that. And so I appreciate the fact that you get passionate about understanding and learning what they're doing.
I care about it because the people here care about it. It's their livelihoods, but it's in the blood. I mean, when you're on a rig, you're talking to somebody who's maybe a third or fourth generation worker in the industry. A lot of the people who own the companies that service those rigs that are operating out of whether it's Port Fourchon here in Houma, they're all third or fourth generation in many cases too. So it's part of our way of life. But again, it's that understanding of the industry where they use the technology that's developed here in America to go and develop reserves in other places around the world. Why shouldn't we be doing more of that here at home? And so, that's something we're passionate about. Sure, we want more wind and solar and all of the above. In the bill I passed, it didn't just deal with oil and gas. It also had the Breeze Act, which allows for more wind energy and revenue sharing for wind energy. But you're not going to get rid of fossil fuels. This idea in Washington that you can replace oil and natural gas with wind and solar is fallacy. It's lunacy. In fact, it would really cripple our economy and rise prices and make us dependent on other countries. We shouldn't be doing that. Let's keep this great American-made technology going strong, and that's what this is all about.
One of the things that makes a huge difference for us down here, coastal erosion, those issues with that, but flood insurance has become such a major issue. It's been a really big deal. And this risk rating 2.0 has been so very confusing for us to figure out how they came up with some of these ideas. You've been very passionate and involved about making sure that you want them to make sure that they're open and honest and some transparency about that. Tell us a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, it's really been frustrating dealing with FEMA on this because FEMA runs the National Flood Insurance Program. And years ago, they started floating the idea of coming out with a new rating system. And we could tell early off that it was not going to be favorable to people who live near water. I mean, obviously we do here in South Louisiana, but you go all the way up to the Eastern Seaboard and New York, New Jersey, they had problems too. And so we were able to get it staved off. Well, about a year and a half ago, FEMA started rolling out risk rating 2.0, and very quickly you could tell it was a flawed methodology. Rate increases were dramatic, double, triple in many cases, what people used to be paying. And so we started asking very fair but tough questions to FEMA. How did you come up with this? What are you modeling to get to these new premiums? I would talk to people down here who build levees, who run flood protection systems. I served in the legislature with Reggie Dupree. And people say, where are they coming up with this? Because it doesn't look like they're taking into account the work that we've done. I mean, a lot of levees down here have been built in Terrebonne and Lafourche that didn't fail. For Katrina, Rita, Ike, you go pick your storm, and yet you're seeing these massive increases that are pricing people out of their homes. And FEMA wouldn't give us the information. I've never seen a federal agency hiding major information about a policy change that's dramatically hurting families. And so we started pushing, and when we got in the majority earlier this year, I talked to the committees of jurisdiction as the majority leader and said, we need to have hearings on this. We need to bring FEMA in and make them answer these tough questions. And so we've started to do that now. They still aren't being transparent. As I've said, risk rating 2.0 is not ready for prime time. If the agency running a program can't tell you how they came to the decision to double or triple your premium, then there's something wrong with that. They should go back to the drawing board. So we're going to keep pushing and fighting FEMA on it because, again, it's not just us in Louisiana. It's a lot of other states. So I've been working on building a coalition. This isn't just Republicans. Republicans, Democrats from all over the country are starting to ask these same questions. And so we're going to press FEMA. We'd like them to scrap this plan, and then let's go to a system that makes sense for families, for taxpayers. But if the law requires you to have flood insurance, they're literally going to shut down places like South Louisiana if they don't fix this program. And so we're going to keep fighting until it gets done.
Yeah, and again, not taking into account some of the major changes, the Merganza to the Gulf, for example, and the protection now that is in place that prevents so much flooding. We've not had any flooding issues from these storms, as you mentioned, and then not being able to tell us where that's coming from. So we appreciate the pushback on that.
Yeah,
You know,
billions of dollars have been spent to upgrade flood protection systems. Again, not just here
Right.
in Louisiana, but all around the country. And we're hearing anecdotal stories like over 40% of the flood protection districts in the country aren't even included in FEMA's mapping, and yet they're sending out premium notices to families that are dramatically increasing their premiums, basically pricing them out.
That's right.
Of flood insurance.
Can't
People are
afford it at all.
dropping policies and walking away from homes. It's devastating. The pricing, your home's value and communities are at risk. We've got to get a change from FEMA on this.
Yeah, and some of the changes that we've seen, some of the impacts, like other people have seen with some of these hurricanes, where we see all this destruction to the homes themselves, and the price increases with supplies and all of those problems that people have had, and insurance and replacing those, and then you put on top of that now a doubling or tripling of flood insurance.
If you're recovering from Ida still, which a lot of families are, you're working to recover from Ida, and the next thing you know, you get this new premium, and it's just a gut punch to families who are already struggling.
Yeah. And so we would appreciate, and I know that we'll get it from you and from your office and staff about where we are with that and some of those changes as we ask for that, and some of that, some of the more transparency from FEMA.
We'll give you an
about
update
that.
as we ask them the tough questions. They're going to have to start answering these questions. Again, we've told them scrap the program. But for the meantime, we're just going to continue battling with FEMA until we get this fixed.
Okay. And so is there a particular timeline that we can expect, or is there anything that we can see? I know that they've rolled out some of those.
Yeah, we've had one hearing now. There's another committee getting ready to have a hearing, the Oversight Committee. I signed on to a letter with the chairman of the Oversight Committee asking FEMA some very specific questions for the next few weeks. We're giving them just a couple of weeks to get us that information. Obviously, we're going to be watching to see what they say, and based on what their answers are, we'll determine where to go from there.
Well, we appreciate it very, very much. I can tell you there are people that live down the street from me. There are people that live a little bit farther south, very much closer to the water, where they're just deciding that we may have to move. Lived here for 50, 60, 70 years, and now they're considering having to move because they can't afford their flood insurance. So we appreciate that. One of the things, it's one of those really big hot topics. It's something that's going to be a big discussion point here in the next couple of weeks coming up, is the Secure the Border Act. This is something that's been very much discussed. It's been a hot topic. Give us a little bit more perspective on that from your end.
Yeah, this is a major package of legislation that's going to be moving to the House floor next week. I've been working with 3 different committee chairs, primarily Jim Jordan's committee, Judiciary. You've got the Homeland Security Committee chaired by Mark Green, as well as the Foreign Affairs Committee. So they've all been moving bills over these last few weeks to address the problem with our border. I mean, America's border is not secure. It's wide open right now. We've seen millions of people the last 2 years come across illegally. I've personally gone down to the border, embedded with our Customs and Border Patrol agents, and they've taken me around to some of the hot spots. And, by like 11 o'clock midnight, you're seeing just a flood of people coming across every single night. And it's something that was created by the Biden administration. They immediately ended the Remain in Mexico policy, which was working really well. Some other protocols, Northern Triangle agreements with other countries in Central America. And what it's done is sent a message throughout the world that America's border is wide open. And if you want to come across the Rio Grande, and you can get into the United States without having to wait. We have a legal process. We've got to get back to that. The Secure the Border Act is focused on fixing the very specific problems that are creating this open border so that we can get back to the rule of law. If you want to come to America, come here legally like everybody else who's come. My great-grandparents came here from Italy. So many families came from other nations, but there's a legal way to do it. And this idea that we're just going to let millions of people come across. We don't even know where they are. There's a report by the New York Times that just came out a few days ago that says 85,000 young kids that have come across our border illegally, they don't even know where they are. The Department of Homeland Security can't even tell you where they are. These are young kids, let alone the adults that are coming over. The drug cartels from Mexico have operational control of our border, and they're bringing drugs across. And I see this here in my district, but all my colleagues all around the country see the drug overdoses. Drugs like fentanyl are being made in China. Then they're being distributed into the United States from the open southern border because the cartels know it's a multi-billion-dollar industry for them. They're killing about 300 young kids a day here in America because the border is open. There's devastating consequences to this. And if the president won't take action, Congress is going to do that. So we're going to pass that bill next week, and it will be probably the strongest border security bill that Congress has ever passed. Now, we need the Senate to take it up. We need the president to take this seriously. But it's a major national problem. It's affecting every community in America. I know my colleagues from Texas talk about it a lot, other border states as well, but primarily you see the problems in Texas. But it doesn't end there. It just begins there. Then people are sent on buses, on planes by dark of night. They won't even tell us where they're sending them. Every state sees young people showing up every single day by the hundreds into every community in America. Where are they going to go? Where are they going to live? What schools are they going to go to? Why don't we get back to the rule of law and enforce our laws that are on the books and secure our border?
You know, it's really interesting. We had a situation here not too long ago with a missing child report. And part of the issue was that this was someone who was here illegally. They didn't have any way to reach out or contact anybody. We didn't know what to do to help the situation for a missing child. We had very little information because it was someone who had come over illegally. That's just one small example of the much
And we see
bigger
it in
issue.
every community in America. It's just this is the United States of America. Let's get back to the rule of law. Every other country has laws that govern how you can go into that country. We're seeing people on the terrorist watch list that are getting caught coming across our border. It's not just South and Central America. There's over 150 different countries around the world that have been caught at different places of the southern border coming across illegally. With all the problems we're seeing, not only terrorist organizations, the threats from China, those countries are sending people across our open southern border too. A lot of them are going to be coming here to do harm, and we don't even know where they are, where they're being sent. It's got to change.
It really makes it difficult on the Department of Homeland Security. How can you keep your homeland secure if you're not monitoring your borders or asking people at least to come over through the process? Find a process. And that's what this bill does. It says, let's get back to a process.
Exactly. There is a legal way to come to America. And by the way, we're the most generous nation in the world. Over 1 million people are allowed to come in legally every year. We've had 4 million people come through illegally by the most conservative counts. It might be a higher number than that. But in the last 2 years, at least 4 million people have come over illegally, if not more. And the numbers are getting worse. We've got to get control over this. It's dramatically increasing crime in communities. You just saw that horrible case in Texas where somebody who came here illegally, he had been deported at least 4 times, went and murdered a family, including a young child. Why are we allowing this to happen? The president is looking the other way. He won't solve the problem. We're going to pass legislation through the House that will deal with it.
Appreciate it. We got about a minute left. Any other updates you'd like to give us or share with us about what's going on with you and how things are going with some of the updates that you're doing?
Yeah, you know, right now we're focused on trying to get our economy back on track. I mean, energy is a big focus, and it's not only important down here in South Louisiana, all across the country, energy policy matters. But just in general, getting people back to work. I mean, you've still got the federal government paying people over $35,000 a year not to work when everybody's looking for workers. Small businesses all around tell you, I need more people. You go to a restaurant and you're waiting and you're looking at a third of the tables empty. Why? Because the federal government's paying people not to work. By the way, that hurts programs like Social Security. If people aren't working, paying their payroll taxes, that hurts a program like Social Security. So we're pushing for basic work requirements, something like what was done back in the 90s with Newt Gingrich and the Republican majority with Bill Clinton, where they put work requirements back in place. I mean, if somebody's going to get federal taxpayer benefits, shouldn't they at least have to be looking for work to do that? That's something we're working on right now, too.
Well, we appreciate all of the updates. Thank you for what you're doing. Thanks for coming in. We appreciate your time today.
Keith, great being with you. Thank you.
Yes, sir. All right. Guys, that will do it for this particular edition of Bayou Time. Don't go anywhere. A lot more local programming right here on HTV.